Ave Maria in the Afternoon is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Welcome to Ave Maria in the Afternoon, examining the world through the lens of faith from the heart of the Church to help us navigate the culture. Here's Dr. Marcus Peter.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us on this hour of Ave Maria in the Afternoon. I'm Marcus Peter. We're going to begin by talking with our friend Doug Keck of EWTN. And we are addressing the elephant in the room that's still calling for attention, which is the impact of Charlie Kirk's assassination. We've actually seen a kind of global impact, a kind of global awakening of the classical conservative movement in terms of virtue, in terms of natural law, but, dare I say it, also a return to Christ and the acceptance of Christ's lordship and a return to the ecclesial community as church. And this seems to be a, like I mentioned, global phenomenon. I was blessed to have attended a memorial service to pray for the nation. This was in the wake of Charlie's demise. And innumerable people were there to begin with. It was packed. But second of all, here in southern Michigan, no less, but the second thing was when the pastors were preaching, and they did what in Protestantism we used to call an altar call, where people were given the opportunity to surrender their lives to Christ for the first time. I lost count how many hands went up. And so we're going to assess those realities that are happening right now, the impact of the death of this one young man, and what we can learn from it, especially as Catholics, in terms of being emboldened to stand up for the truth of Christ in the public sphere and to not cede ground to the enemy. We go on from there to speak about the line of free speech. I've been frankly horrified by the barrage and the onslaught of individuals who are not only celebrating Charlie's assassination, but also calling for the assassination of more people. And I want to talk about this in light of the reality of what free speech actually entails in the minds of the framers, but to move on from there to the moral accountability of free speech and the accountability of our speech in God, what that truly entails. And finally, we speak with my friend Dr. Billy Kangas. He and I have been talking, in light of recent events, about what that accountability ought to look like in the grander scheme of a biblical worldview. This morning, I was going through some files and just considering some things, especially late yesterday, and I thought of my late mentor's exhortation to develop a biblical worldview, and I chanced upon it. I want to talk about all of this after the headlines.
Thanks, Marcus. Good afternoon, everyone. This is your Ave Maria Radio News for Monday, September 15th. It's the Feast of Our Lady of Sorrows. Today's news brought to you by the Ave Maria family of funds at AveMariaFunds.com. Catholics in St. Peter's Square took a moment to wish Pope Leo a happy 70th birthday yesterday during his Angelus address. People carried signs and a musical group played Happy Birthday before the Pope offered some reflections on the Feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross. FBI Director Kash Patel says Charlie Kirk's alleged shooter texted his plan to, quote, take out the conservative activist. Patel said the suspect, 22-year-old Tyler Robinson, sent someone a text before the attack saying he was going to do it because he hated what Kirk stood for. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the focus is on what happens next after Israel bombed Hamas targets in Doha.
And part of what we're going to have to discuss as part of this visit is how the events of last week with Qatar impact that.
He met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today in Jerusalem. Speaking alongside Netanyahu, Rubio reiterated the U.S. still wants to get a peace deal done, but acknowledged that it may no longer be possible. The White House is boosting funding to historically black colleges and universities. Secretary of Education Linda McMahon said the department was, quote, redirecting financial support away from ineffective and discriminatory programs towards those which support student success. The nearly $500 million boost was coupled with an extra $137 million for American history and civics education, as well as $60 million for charter schools. And New York Governor Kathy Hochul is endorsing socialist Zohran Mamdani for New York City mayor. Hochul announced her support for Mamdani with a New York Times op-ed where she praised his affordability platform, but also indicated she doesn't agree with all the state assemblyman's goals. From your AveMariaRadio.net news desk, I'm Steve Clark.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, joined by our friend Doug Keck of EWTN to talk about recent events, in particular the impact of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, Christian preacher and political commentator. Doug, thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. And like you, very much jarred by Charlie's assassination. I want to give you a wide berth here and to just share about your experiences when you found out what happened.
Well, I think when I first heard it, you hope that he got shot, but that he was okay.
Right.
When you saw the video, obviously it was clear that the likelihood of that was quite small. And I think in some ways, some people I think are commenting, well, why is this such a giant impact? Why is it hitting people so much? Some people say, well, these children got shot and there wasn't even the same kind of reaction recently. But this was on TV ultimately. Mm-hmm. This is on video. If you wanted to, you could see exactly the horrific act. And I think it also did, on one level, woke people up or shocked people back to the assassination attempt in Butler, where people, in effect, saw what was designed to happen to then candidate Trump. Mm-hmm. And that if it wasn't for the miraculous turning of the head, we would have seen that same kind of situation.
Right.
Exploding literally in front of our faces on video. And I think it shocked a lot of people to realize that these things are not just talk, that there are people out there who take this stuff incredibly seriously, and unfortunately, for whatever reason in their minds, think they become justified in doing this. And I think that's one of the things that I think all of us have to step back on, is this idea of constantly naming people things and basically dehumanizing the opponent. I mean, it's amazing how many people quote, he's a fascist, he's a fascist. Mm-hmm. I bet you 90% of those people couldn't tell you what a fascist actually is. They couldn't tell you who invented fascism. They couldn't tell you that Mussolini was a socialist before he became a fascist. Mm-hmm. That the Nazis were socialists. They couldn't know any of those things, but they banter these words around. And they do exactly what the Nazis did. What did the Nazis do to people of disabilities? Life not worthy of living. That's how they got rid of them. What did they do? They equated the Jews to rats. Right. That was the imagery to show that. And after a while, they were no longer really people. They were subhuman. Maybe you could see that in the era of slavery, for everybody to talk against slavery, the idea of dehumanizing your enemy. And when you do that, it makes your ability to eliminate them, to say that they need to be silenced. And I think the other thing is that, Charlie always talked about the idea that, if you don't have that kind of conversation and dialogue, then you devolve into what ended up happening to him. Right. But the problem is with so many of us today, because we have the ability to virtually isolate ourselves in our own unique little bubbles, and I think on the internet there's incredible bubbles that all of us probably don't even have any idea are going on, very deep, dark bubbles, where people are just feeding off each other and in these echo chambers of anger and hate, and ultimately, convincing themselves, well, geez, if he's really Hitler and he's like Hitler, wouldn't you want to kill Hitler? Wouldn't you kill Hitler if he was a baby? And all this kind of justification that makes these people think that what they're doing is okay. And as you related to, the idea of people following up after it and saying, oh, I'm happy he's dead. Right. Or, good, one down, 100 to go, kind of thing like that. Instead of saying, listen, this is a horrible thing. I wasn't a person I agreed with. I didn't even like his tactics, if that's the thing. But no one should get killed. This is ridiculous. We have to tone things down. But everything is so political, and everything is about scoring points, that even people, and I heard somebody else say this, and I think it's good for all of us to step back and think about, but the idea that it's not just the fringe. There's people who you would think are basically, I'm a liberal or I'm a progressive, but otherwise they seem, who are also, saying some of these things. Yeah. And again, because everybody's gotten into their own camps, and our dissonance is incredible. Our inability to take in any information that runs counter to what my beliefs already are. As soon as you threaten me with your perspective, what do? I don't respond. I don't have the answer, so what do? I call you a name.
Right.
I say, I don't have to listen to you because you're a horrible person. And so I can dismiss what you're saying rather than deal with what you're saying.
And like you mentioned, everything's become so politicized, but we're also colored by an overt sense of relativism that we've never seen in, especially the American civilization. And so there's an incapacity from an entire swath of the population to engage rationally, and therefore an unwillingness to do so.
Well, exactly. And from a Christian perspective, the idea of right and wrong, there are things that are right and wrong. There may be some shades of gray, but they don't change what's black and white. Okay, the black and white is still there. There may be some culpability, there might be some responsibilities, there may be mitigating circumstances and things in there. It doesn't change the fact that something's right or wrong, and I don't care what you believe in, doing that is horribly wrong, and there's no way to justify that. And if you're justifying it, you really have to look in the mirror and say, are you really a Christian? Right. Are you a person of faith at all who could take that perspective? Do you think Jesus would be cheering on the death of this particular person? Do you think that would be the case? We all know that that's ridiculous, but there are good people out there, I'm sure. Good Catholics and good Christians and other people who consider themselves, to be very good people, who will take that perspective or are quick to go in that perspective because they've been fed so much information that's not true. And that's the other thing. If you actually saw Charlie do his thing, he was very low-key. He was just responsive. He certainly was not, a racist. Anybody who says that, there's a man who actually a gay black gentleman on the web who debunked all of the statements that have been used to show that he was a racist or that he was anti-gay that we used out of context. He had probably a broader he had the church's openness of saying, gay people are gay people. I can respect a gay person. I can be with a gay person. Doesn't mean I agree with their lifestyle or I wouldn't pray that, Jesus Christ would change their heart. But it doesn't make them bad people.
Right. And therein lies the massive issue. Doug, before I let you go, I want to ask you, by virtue of all of that, to share about why you think it is that so many people are saying that this felt very personal. Most of us didn't know him personally, but this felt like it hit home.
Well, I think it hit home with a lot of younger people, especially, I think, because they're looking for the truth, and they're looking for something to believe in, and they saw a young guy out there who had the courage of his convictions, even if they didn't always agree with him. And I think for a lot of people, he also spoke up, coming up during a period of the cancel culture and the wokeism, where you're not supposed to say these things. And if you say these things, you're a horrible person. And people who knew that some of the stuff that was going on was absolutely wrong, and we're seeing it now. All of that's just rolling back, and the vast majority of people never believed it in the first place. They just were afraid. It was the emperor's new clothes. Nobody wanted to get in trouble because the hangman would come for you if you said anything. Right. So everybody kept quiet, even though they knew what was going on was incorrect. And there's still a lot of people, unfortunately, out there who get their news in certain places, in situations, and we have to ourselves. One of the reasons I think Catholic News and EWTN and Ave Maria and others is it's a touchstone. Get straight up news about the church, even if you don't agree with all the stories. Maybe sometimes you think this story is a little too progressive or this story is a little too conservative. Donald Trump, it may not be your favorite person, but he's not Satan. Okay,
right,
and Rosie O'Donnell is not Satan either. So we have to, regardless of how we feel about those particular people and their statements, we can, be totally in disagreement and should work very hard and channel our upsetment and channel our anger into positive things. Just like other people have in the past when they saw things that were incorrect. Yep. They worked to get those things corrected. But you don't do that by taking the law in your own hands and killing somebody. Yep.
And that's why we need to keep fighting for the reality of free speech to be free and virtuous. Thank you, Doug.
Absolutely. Thank you.
My guest has been Doug Keck, host of EWTN Bookmark, former president and COO of EWTN. And he's been echoing what's on the minds of everyone listening. that this is liberty that needs to be grounded in virtue. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
Today's programming on 990 WDEO is brought to you in part by a gift from our day sponsor to honor the Legionnaires of Christ in Reginam Christi on this, the Feast of Our Lady of Sorrows. We thank them for their dedication to the Church and for helping its members grow in faith, hope, love, and charity.
You can be a day sponsor too. Just pick up the phone and call toll-free 1-877-288-1077 and say, I want to be a day sponsor.
When the need for senior care arises, home is where the heart is. Visiting Angels provides home care for mom or dad up to 24 hours per day, including personal care, meals, and light housework. You may select your professional caregiver with Visiting Angels. More information at visitingangels.com or at 877-374-LIVE. That's 877-374-LIVE. Visiting Angels, America's choice in senior home care.
You like pizza? Me too. And for that, we can thank our friend Tom Monahan. First, he starts with $900 and opens one pizza shop. Then it's worldwide, thousands of shops. But all this was just a warm-up for his greatest achievement yet. He built a university.
God inspired Tom to build up generations of men and women who have a hunger to reach the world for Christ. This place is Ave Maria University.
Visit avemaria.edu to see what's next.
Ave Maria in the Afternoon is underwritten by the following nonprofit organization: Real Estate for Life. Buying or selling your home or business property? Real Estate for Life can connect you with one of 1,400 pro-life real estate agents around the world. When Real Estate for Life receives a referral fee, they donate 70% to Ave Maria Radio and Human Life International. More information at realestateforlife.org or 877-LIFE-US1. That's realestateforlife.org.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. The shockwaves that followed Charlie Kirk's assassination have not ceased. The murder was tragic and horrific, but what's been more revealing and actually repulsive to me is the manner with which thousands are still celebrating openly, publicly, and without shame his death and calling for more, because some individuals have been emboldened by some notion of toxic anonymity and the intoxication of this ideological zeal that they're now expressing glee at workplaces, professional settings, and the consequences have been predictable. We've had firings, suspensions, public dismissals. These events unveil not just a mere disagreement about political conviction. This is an indicator of the moral fracture in the American soul. For decades now, we've been told America's divided, left and right, liberal and conservative, Democrat and Republican. My friends, we've just seen widespread eruption of joy at a man's assassination. That signals something immensely deeper than political divide. It's a demonic moral chasm. When the murder of an opponent, a Christian opponent in this case, you disagreed with him on politics but also his faith, evokes jubilation rather than grief, the bonds that we fight for in terms of common cause and civic life, they're gone. Because what remains is not disagreement among citizens, it's a war between fundamentally opposed moral worldviews. And so it's vital to be clear here. The violence that erupts, the celebration of violence, the call for further bloodshed, this didn't emerge in equal measures from both sides. I don't care who keeps trying to put out that narrative. It's very clear. History has told us plainly too. Anti-theistic progressivism, whenever it comes into cultural dominance, it slides into blood violence against dissenters. Every single time. The French Revolution's reign of terror, the Bolshevik purges, Mao's cultural cleansing. The trajectory has always been the same. When you reject biblical anthropology, when man is no longer seen as being made in the image of God, but simply raw material for governmental ideological remolding, and when he dissents against that, well, the only end is destruction. Natural law is rejected. Truth and morality are mere constructs. The only force left to resolve this conflict is raw power and murder. And so the murder of Kirk and the subsequent glee on display, they're just recent manifestations of an age-old demonic pattern And this debate is now spilling out in workplaces, public squares, and they're trying to raise concerns about free speech. So people are being fired for celebrating Kirk's death, and now they're crying out, well, we were only exercising our rights. What about free speech? Their pleas ring hollow to me, especially when we remember that the very same ideological cohort that for years shouted at those who are social conservatives, your speech is hate speech, and hate speech has consequences. Now, when the shoe is on the other foot, the cry is inverted. That irony couldn't be more glaring. To clarify, the American constitutional guarantee of free speech is a legal guarantee from government suppression. The First Amendment exists to protect the citizen from the state. The government, in a nation grounded on liberty, has no authority to silence speech based on one's religion, conscience, or in this case, political conviction. This remains one of the most remarkable achievements of the American founding. Madison argued in his memorial and remonstrance against religious assessments that freedom of conscience is unalienable, preceding civil society itself. Free speech, therefore, is not a gift of the state. It's a recognition of man's God-given liberty. But note this does not mean that speech is free from consequence. Here lies the crucial distinction. Civil society, employers, and private associations also possess freedom. So freedom to associate, freedom to establish, to contract, to express their values, to contract. If a worker celebrates an assassination on a company's social media platform, or even a personal social media platform, the employer has both the right and the duty to act in accordance with its own values. And that's not the suppression of free speech by the state. It's the exercise of free speech by a community or institution. The framers understood this dynamic. They didn't envision liberty as an unbounded license to say whatever one wished without consequence. Liberty was understood as ordered freedom, tethered to virtue. John Adams declared, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral, religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." And I know I quote that a lot. Liberty without virtue, he knew, would dissolve and devolve into license, and license into tyranny. A virtuous liberty functions as its own check. It ought to. A society that's ordered toward truth celebrates speech that ennobles and rejects speech that corrodes. The spectrum of reactions to Kirk's assassination actually provides a chilling barometer of our cultural condition, because at one end are those who recognize the horror. A man was assassinated. But at the next tier are the indifferent. Kirk was assassinated, I do not care. But then you've got also a spectrum beginning from there. The descent is swift. Kirk was assassinated, I am glad. And then lower. Kirk was assassinated, let us celebrate. And finally, the abyss. Kirk was assassinated, let us demand more assassinations. This spectrum reveals where the human heart stands. Indifference is already a wound against injustice, but it refuses to mourn the taking of innocent life. Gladness at death is a deeper corruption. It rejoices in what God abhors. Celebration and the call for more killings crosses into the territory of incitement. At this point, we're already in moral evil. No one can make a serious legal argument that celebrating assassination publicly on social media is beyond the reach of social consequence. The Supreme Court has repeatedly recognized limits when speech tips into incitement, defamation, or direct threats. Even apart from legal lines, speech is always accountable in the court of public opinion. To broadcast one's glee at bloodshed in a semi-formal public setting like social media, which it is, mind you. Social media is not a private enterprise, in as much as it has a public component. It is a semi-formal public setting. It's to invite judgment from society itself. This entire episode exposes what Alexis de Tocqueville foresaw nearly 2 centuries ago. He warned, democracy in America could only flourish so long as religion provided the moral ballast. He said this, liberty cannot be established without morality, nor morality without faith. Once faith erodes, the moral foundation crumbles and liberty is imperiled. So the celebration of Kirk's assassination is an illustration of this erosion. Hatred became so consuming that human life is denied its dignity. What remains is not liberty, it's barbarism, and it's continuing. The anti-theistic ideology that fuels this celebration is not neutral, it is parasitic. It feeds on the moral capital accumulated by centuries of Judeo-Christian teaching, but then devours it until nothing remains but bloodshed and nihilism. What we now see is that there may not be any common ground left to unite America across that political divide. Because this divide is not just about marginal tax rates, government reach, infrastructure spending. It's about the nature of man, truth, morality, and the dignity of life. One side insists man is created in the image of God, endowed with unalienable rights, accountable to divine justice. The other insists man is a malleable creature of history, truth is subjective, morality is whatever the ideological majority declares it to be, and if you dissent, you must be removed by force and bloodshed. These two visions have no reconciliation. For Christians, speech is never neutral. Words have weight because they flow from the human heart and reflect the intellectual capacity that comes from God himself. The Lord himself declared, out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. Speech has the power to build up or destroy, to bless or to curse. The Catechism teaches that every person is bound to speak the truth. But this means speech is accountable not only before men but before God. James warned us, the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness, but with it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who are made in the image of God. To rejoice at assassination is to curse the image of God in man. No legal justification, no cultural trend, no ideological fervor can excuse this before the judgment seat of Christ. In that light, my friends, the word of the Lord remains. By your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. None of us is exempt from that accountability. Not the assassin, not those who celebrate, not even those who mourn and write. Speech is a trust from God. To wield it rightly is to bless, to wield it wrongly is to curse and destroy. Let us rediscover that truth before it's too late. I'm Marcus Peter.
Ave Maria School of Law is the Roman Catholic law school in the United States. Consistently ranked in the Princeton Review as one of the best and most conservative law schools, as well as pre-law's most devout law school. Ave Maria School of Law provides a traditional legal education while emphasizing how the law intersects with the Catholic intellectual tradition and natural law philosophy. Ave Maria School of Law, unabashedly Catholic, consistently excellent. For more information, visit avemarialaw.edu.
Looking for a trusted contractor for your exterior home improvements? Call locally owned Mighty Dog Roofing today for a quote on roofing, gutters, siding, or windows. Mighty Dog Roofing uses premium products including Owens Corning shingles and James Hardy fiber cement siding, and they offer one of the best warranties in the industry through their OC Platinum Preferred status. Visit MightyDogRoofing.com today or call 833-MIGHTY-4. That's 833-MIGHTY-4.
Mother Teresa once said, "There are many good people in the world. If you can't find one, be one." There's so much divisiveness and tension among people in the world today. Our politicians and big tech leaders and media have driven a wedge between us, so we don't even try to find common ground. People are so ready to shut down and silence anyone who speaks truth. Jesus told us that we would be persecuted for following him, and those who do can point to many incidences where Christians are canceled out in many ways. Mother Teresa urged us to do good anyway. She has been quoted as saying, "People are often unreasonable, irrational, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of being selfish or having an ulterior motive. Be kind anyway. In the final analysis, it's between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway." This has been a Christ-centered communication message. I'm Vanessa Denha-Garmo, a communications evangelist and host of Epiphany.
Are we always obliged to obey our conscience? The Catholic Catechism asserts that we are always obliged to obey the certain judgment of our conscience, and that if we deliberately act against a good conscience, we condemn ourselves. On the other hand, our moral conscience may remain in ignorance, and thus we can make erroneous judgments about acts performed in the future or those performed in the past. If ignorance is caused by personal responsibility or negligence, we are culpable of the sin we commit. Some of the causes of erroneous judgment can be ignorance of Christ and his gospel, bad examples of peers, enslavement to one's passion, rejection of the Church's authority and her teaching, lack of conversion, and lack of charity. This is Peggy Stanton, and this has been the Order of Malta's Minute with the Catechism.
Catholic Charities of Shiawassee and Genesee counties have been providing health and creating hope since 1941. It's the generosity of donors that allows them to provide necessary services such as their warming center, which provides refuge and comfort to thousands in our community. They also offer hot meals in their soup kitchens and help families make ends meet in their community closet. Even the smallest donation makes a meaningful difference. Join us in their mission by giving a donation at CatholicCharitiesFlint.org.
This program brought to you in part by Ave Maria, Florida, a big kind of small town where golf carts take you everywhere and there's always something fun around the corner. Discover championship golf, resort-style amenities, and a town center full of shopping and dining. With Ave Maria University and Ave Maria Catholic Church at its heart, it's a community full of connection and charm. More than 25 model homes are available for viewing. More information can be found at AveMaria.com. That's AveMaria.com.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm joined by my friend Dr. Billy Kangas, Vice President of Missions at Ave Maria Radio. Earlier this morning, and actually I started late yesterday, I was thinking about some of the lessons I learned from my predecessor and late mentor, Al. And one of the things that Al was a stalwart proponent of was the necessity of all the faithful to have a strongly biblical worldview. And that was how he saw his own work. Everything was viewed through the lens of Jesus' teachings in his church and in the scriptures. Billy and I got into a conversation, and that's why Billy's here right now. We're talking about this reality of a biblical worldview. And so, Billy, thank you very much for making the time to talk with us. How are you?
I know. I'm so glad that we have the ability to reflect on this, because I think without a biblical worldview, we can so easily fall into other stories that can be very detrimental to us. And I think that's become evident in just the amount of tragic, violent, national news that we've seen. You asked how I'm doing and all that. To tell you the truth, I'm doing well personally, but I'm heartbroken.
Yeah.
And I've spent a lot of the last couple weeks, honestly, and it's more and more just reflecting on the world that we live in and ultimately the hope that we have. I was thinking about this passage in Revelation all day. It's where they declare the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ has the victory. And I had to remember that ultimately. And that's really what a biblical worldview is about. It's helping keep the story that I'm living not completely consumed by the heartbreaking evil, violence, and distortions, really, of the day-to-day life, or even in my personal world, but always to keep in mind that I'm in the middle of a story, and I know the beginning, that God created us on purpose and for good, and the end, that He shall reign forever and ever. And we find ourselves in the middle of that, but the biblical worldview keeps me grounded, and without that, I would be in trouble. So that's how I'm doing today.
I'm well. How are you too? Okay, so as you're talking, I'm reminiscent of this fundamental theological premise, which is that which is first in the order of reason is last in the order of revelation. Right, and I know that sounds like a loaded axiom, but and Billy's going to help unpack that for us. But effectively, even before we can talk about a biblical worldview, which is the greatest, most expansive way man can view reality, right, a magisterial worldview, sometimes the induction point, as you and I were talking about earlier, has to be at the level of natural law. And I wonder if we could begin there, especially in light of discovering that the violence isn't over. In Utah Valley, my friend Peter Laffin informed us that an incendiary device was discovered under a news van, and so 2 people have been apprehended. we're not going to see a cessation immediately. Can you please tell me about the lack of a natural law worldview first?
Well, I think we are built to be captivated by stories, and that's kind of a way that worldview functions. It's like, how do you understand yourself? There's a reason that if I want to interest my children, I start by saying, once upon a time, and they automatically they know there's something there. And so there's a way that we are built to try to be sense makers, and one of the key ways that we make sense is through story. Natural law is always cued in towards, how is it that we're made?
Right.
How do we understand the world that we live in by thinking clearly about the people that we are, the world that we inhabit? There's these things that inform how we interact with the world. And one of the problems that we're facing right now is that there has been a way that story, that way of seeing the world that redounds to how we're made, has been supplanted by many different, in many cases, completely contradictory ideological frameworks.
Right.
So rather than what you say, where the natural law, in a certain sense, connects with that part of who we are and can be a tutor that leads us to Christ, instead what we have are these other cacophonous stories that lead ultimately to despair, because they don't lead towards meaning, they don't move us towards the ultimate end that we are made for, but instead direct us into increasingly fragmented ideological subcategories that are inherently in conflict even with one another, so that you have a kind of human being that's become compartmentalized as a series of identities, and not as something that's kind of a unified creation that is ultimately finding its way towards truth and in truth to God and things like that. So I do think we're at a critical moment, because I do see all around me people who don't seem to be living from a place of either natural law or certainly not from a worldview of God's story, divine revelation, a biblical worldview, but tend to put on worldviews like outfits. They'll put on a worldview to make a point, and then when you try to engage with that point, they'll shift. And right. So it ceases to be it's very hard to have any kind of a productive conversation, because people are shifting their worldview to meet the needs of a particular identity, but as their perspective shifts, along with that, truth can just dance to the next, how they understand the world is able to change and evolve moment by moment, and I do think that creates a disintegration of the human person, and because it no longer has a narrative that's telling them that you're here for some reason and for some purpose.
Right. And so the struggle for the baptized, those who believe in Christ, is we know, our consciences are made to know there's an objective right, objective wrong. There's a moral good, a moral evil. And when you dialogue with someone so even in that, the shifting of worldviews is a grander worldview of relativism, which is really saying nothing. And, you just feel the heartbreak of parents unable to dialogue with relativistic children, friends unable to dialogue with relativistic friends. If you could just speak to that.
And this has been the reality for a long time.
Yeah, that's right. It's not novel.
People have, and this has been the trend of our culture for a very long time, is this hermeneutic of suspicion, this idea that you want to view any kind of truth claim with a perspective of suspicious. Like you think that anyone who has power is utilizing that in some way to manipulate you. Developed as a mainstream perspective in the embers of the 20th century with 2 world wars and countless atrocities, and the recognition that authority was in many cases wielded for evil. But what's resulted from that is an entire generation of people who have never even had the framework of truth to ground their lives in. And, I'm a firm believer in the spiritual world, spiritual realm, and spiritual warfare. And what we've seen in recent years is there seems to be a trend more and more towards people who are giving up on kind of this relativism and moving towards the gospel. And I think what we're seeing today is a spiritual response from the enemy.
My guest is Dr. Billy Kangas, Vice President of Missions at Ave Maria Radio. We're talking about embracing a biblical worldview, and we're starting by addressing the very real present cultural attacks against this holistic and true biblical worldview. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
Do you own popular index mutual funds or ETFs? If so, you're automatically own shares of companies that conflict with your moral beliefs. Ave Maria mutual funds are managed to conform to pro-life and pro-family values. Long-term investors can invest in the no-load Ave Maria mutual funds. The experienced professional portfolio managers make decisions based on investment fundamentals and pro-life values. You can learn more about Ave Maria mutual funds today at 866-AVE-MARIA or visit AveMariaFunds.com.
Underwritten in part by the following nonprofit.
Are you paying high prices with a traditional health insurance company that pays for things that violate your conscience? There's an alternative available. Solidarity HealthShare is a community of faithful individuals and families that never share into immoral medical services, all while saving you money with prices starting as low as $85 per month for singles and $512 for families. Never fund another abortion with your healthcare dollars. Call 844-313-4999 to learn more.
It's time for Family Man with Dr. Gregory Popchak.
St. John Bosco taught his followers that it wasn't enough to stop their students' bad behavior. Good discipline teaches children to want to make choices that please the Lord. If your child is behaving badly, chances are they either don't know how to meet a particular need appropriately, or they don't know how to apply the lessons you've taught them to a new, challenging situation. To practice good discipleship discipline, take a moment to find out what your child was trying to do by acting that way. Then teach them healthier, godlier ways to meet that need. Taking this approach will help your kids know that they can count on you to help them be their best when they're feeling and acting their worst. To discover more ways your family can celebrate the liturgy of domestic church life, check out the newest editions of Parenting with Grace and visit CatholicCounselors.com. I'm Dr. Greg Popchak, but you can call me Family Man.
To discover more ways faith can enrich your life, visit CatholicCounselors.com.
The Heart of the Interior Life with Elizabeth Jangle.
In the 14th rule of St. Ignatius of Loyola's 14 Rules for the Discernment of Spirits, St. Ignatius teaches us about the enemy's method of attack on a soul. He writes, in the same way, the enemy of human nature, roving about, looks in turn at all our theological, cardinal, and moral virtues, and where he finds us weakest and most in need for our eternal salvation, there he attacks us and attempts to take us. Father Timothy Gallagher writes, in Rule 14, Ignatius centers on the enemy's astute sense of the weakest point in our spiritual life, and his unerring choice of that weakest point as his place of attack. Knowing the weakest point in our spiritual life can assist us in working to ward off an attack from the enemy. How might we work to strengthen the weakest point in our spiritual lives?
For more information, visit AveMariaRadio.net. Underwritten in part by this not-for-profit.
Hi, this is Mike Ditkin.
Hey, this is Brian May.
Hi, I'm Chris Farley. You're listening to the Kevin Matthews Show.
I thought he was insane. A lot of people thought he was insane.
Nobody could touch us. We had 10 million people listening to us a week.
But that was my past. If you would have told me I'd be carrying around a broken statue of the Virgin Mary, talking about God, I'd say, are you high?
Broken Mary, the Kevin Matthews story. In theaters one day only on Tuesday, October 7th. Tickets at brokenmaryfilm.com.
St. Therese once told her sister Celine that when we trust ourselves and not God, our soul becomes barren and incapable of virtue. Her remedy? External works of charity. We all try to do it on our own sometimes without asking for God's help. At St. Paul Evangelization, we suggest sharing the gospel with someone who needs it. Check out streetevangelization.com to find a team near you where you can share the love of Jesus. If there isn't one in your area yet, perhaps God is calling you to start a team in your city. To learn more, visit streetevangelization.com.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, talking with my friend Dr. Billy Kangas, Vice President of Missions at Ave Maria Radio. And we're talking about a biblical worldview, and we're piggybacking off of one of the great messages of the late, great Al Cresta. Billy, when we had last left off, you had begun touching on how what we're seeing right now, it really is an onslaught, both in terms of blood, but also verbally and in terms of action, against this move, this resurgence of classical virtue and even a reclamation of faith in the United States. So I want to invite you to pick up where you left off there.
Yeah, so let me draw from my biblical worldview. Mm-hmm. And Scripture cautions us of the wiles of the devil in many ways. He's described as a lion seeking those to devour, but also we're cautioned against angels of light. Mm-hmm. And in my estimation, the devil generally prefers if he's able to wreak havoc as an angel of light rather than a prowling lion, at least in terms of how he's perceived. And I think in some ways we're dealing with a moment in our society when people are changing their views. The saccharine song of relativism, where you're able to believe whatever you would like to believe. Right. You are able to put on worldviews as a matter of fashion and convenience has been disrupted. And we're seeing people returning to faith, Orthodoxy, Catholicism, other forms of Christianity in startlingly positive numbers. People are really turning around. I've been praying, and I keep being drawn to this command of Christ to pray to the Lord of the harvest to bring forth laborers. So I do think that there's some good that's happened. But in the midst of that, I think that prowling lion, our enemy, there's a shift in tactic. No longer can you subtly whisper lies to put people to sleep to the story of who God is and what He's doing. Now there's a desperation, and when I see some of the kinds of things I've been seeing online, it's shocking. Yeah, because it's raw, it's violent, it's illogical, and it almost feels as if people who have allowed themselves to be coaxed into the slumber of the demonic worldview are now being woken up to the nightmare of kind of that desperate clinging to something new. So I don't know if that's a good way of putting it, but
it definitely presents a good visual to picture, because let's face it, what we're seeing is so irrational that it's inscrutable. The average person listening right now has no idea why the panic, the hatred, the sheer vitriol that we're seeing.
And I think, the vitriol comes because people are seeing things. Why there's no logic to someone shooting up a school full of children, but the fact that it happened in a Catholic venue, I think that's demonic. Somebody like Charlie Kirk, who you can certainly disagree with, but was his primary weapon was conversation. To respond with that level of violence, I think is only necessitated if somebody views their own position as untenable through other means. And as you see the culture begin to change, and people begin to have opinions they're willing to share that only a few years ago would have been considered quote-unquote cancelable offenses.
Right.
Those who maybe had the stranglehold on those kinds of intimidation tactics are resorting to more extreme modes of response, if not in actual violence. And thankfully, we haven't seen wide-scale violence, but we have seen wide-scale proponents or celebrations of violence, and that to me is a very troubling turn of events. To be able to see people, I've seen people who I know, who I believed were maybe, although they might disagree with me, were at least reasonable interlocutors, saying things that are unconscionable online.
Yeah,
and that's very troubling to me.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Without throwing any names around, and of course persons, anywhere from my large extended family to people I grew up with, at the lowest level, people are effectively saying he asked for it or he brought it upon himself. But at the worst level, they're rejoicing, they're happy, and they think it's the start of a good thing, and that more needs to happen. And these are people I personally know. Again, you have your faith in Christ that informs a worldview that's grounded in salvation history. So you know that even in these darkest historical events, God is working all things together for the good of those who love the Lord, who have been called into His purpose. But in the process of watching Him do that, the evil that we see is still irrational and inscrutable.
And I think that's one of the key reasons that we begin our conversation talking about a biblical worldview. If you don't have the right understanding of the story that you're living in, you can easily be caught off guard or dragged in the wrong direction. We're built to live into stories, and if I begin the story that I'm telling my children, in a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, they're going to assume there's going to be lightsabers. If the story that people are living into is grounded in the macabre, if it's grounded in irrationality, if it's grounded in a moral basis that's and I do think we've seen sort of the disintegration of a groundedness, and human life at that point ceases to be something that's cherished and valued, but it can be seen as something that's an impediment to your own desires, and so can be discarded. And that's what I worry about is that people have become formed by a story that doesn't begin that humans were made in the image and likeness of God, that they were made very good. What I would say one of the great treasures of the Christian and Western tradition is this affirmation that people have this innate dignity that can never be destroyed. And without that, then, we've seen this. You look at many other historical civilizations that didn't have that were guilty of some of the most heinous barbaries and destruction. And so I do think we have to be very careful that we, as we're in the middle of this change, become continually rooted in the truth of the gospel and don't fall into the kind of reactionary responses to violence that play out of a different worldview, a worldview of calculating retribution rather than gracious redemption, which is the story that the Bible speaks of and that we need to live out of as Christians and Catholics.
Right. So parents are listening right now. And as a parent, as a fellow parent, it's inevitable that our worldview winds up coinciding with our states of life. They're watching as sometimes their own children, but more often than not, just people the age of their children are getting swept up anywhere into the relativism, the vitriol, and they have some kind of a biblical worldview. I want to ask if you could speak to solidifying and making concrete the scaffolding of that worldview, and then, by means of a kind of evangelical force, endowing their children with the same so that they have a fighting chance.
That's the thing I pray about every day. And it is very, very important that we build the right scaffolding, and that means we're teaching good truths, we're saying the right things, but we're also wanting to make sure that we are walking with our children into how do you then live that out. And so one of the things I think is very important is that, yes, we are helping them think with the mind of Christ, with the mind of the church, using reason and their faculties consistently, but then also demonstrating and accompanying our children in living that out. So if we believe that all human beings are made with dignity, then how are we responding to the human beings in our own world that are suffering? And in my own view, it's always this balance of teaching, helping them have, but then also helping them have experiences where they are recognizing, they're seeing me as a man of prayer, a man of generosity, of service, really virtue. And this becomes the real battleground for each of us, is not that we defeat evil by going out there and somehow attacking all of the people online who are doing these things, but rather saying, where's the evil in me? And living a life of virtue that can then inspire others, our children, our neighbors, our community of faith.
My guest has been Dr. Billy Kangas, Vice President of Missions at Ave Maria Radio, and he has just helped us find grounding again in the scriptures and in the teachings of the church, that it is about giving faith in Christ and living it out and inviting others to do the same. Thank you for joining us. I'm Marcus Peter.